All right, what up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we have Bryan Gillette, who is an executive coach, author, speaker, facilitator, and ultra distance athlete. Bryan, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Timmy. It's good to be on your show.
Of course, it's good to have you on, and we like to jump right in. So if
Good.
you could start with telling us a little bit more about yourself and what you like to do for fun, that'd be great.
Yeah, what I like to do for fun. So, I mean, you hit some of the key points. I really think there's kind of three aspects of who I am. One, I'm a dad of two boys and husband. Live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I enjoy adventure. So all things adventures, whether it's running, whether it's cycling, whether it's traveling. And then on the work side, I do executive coaching or facilitate teams. So a team's trying to come together, they're trying to figure out where do we need to go in the next couple of years and how do we coalesce around that in order to make sure we're going in the right direction, we're doing the right things, we're measuring the right things. And so that's a little bit fun. I love to travel. And you know, when I talk about big goals, one of them is to hit all seven continents. So I need one more to do that, Antarctica. So starting to look at that's one of the dreams that okay, figure out how do I make that happen? And then my wife and I just kind of in the last week we just booked a trip to Alaska this January
Okay.
to see the Northern Lights. So anytime I get a chance to travel, I'm going to take it, and we're very deliberate about getting our kids out to travel. So I love it. I spent a year traveling around the world with our two boys and took them out of school, and just a phenomenal experience. So that's kind of a little bit about the fun. I enjoy mountain biking. I enjoy road biking. Enjoy running, and just to it's good to stay in shape. Plus, it also pushes me into new areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Where's your favorite place that you've been?
You know, I don't, I can't answer like one favorite place. I've got like, I loved Botswana and just seeing all the animals in Botswana. I loved parts of South America and the different types of foods and going through Patagonia. And so, we went down a couple years ago to Tahiti. I had been there before. So that's beautiful. It's there's so many different places, but there's no one thing that stands out. It's like this is my favorite.
Yeah,
It's
I got you.
yeah. I mean, I can look at places like I've gone in and I've known people because they're friends of friends, and it makes the country so much better. Where you eat food, and you can just kind of feel that or taste that food. That just makes it a wonderful place to go. So all sorts of places. I'll go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. There we go. And so, as an executive coach, you're saying you're really helping teams get clear on a goal and get to that goal. Is that right? And kind of unify?
Yeah, so when I'm working with teams, that's often a big thing. I'll get called in by some of the one of the executives and say, hey, two things I'm generally working on. One is we want to figure out where we want to go for the next couple of years. And so help us put that together and then help us kind of coalesce around that strategy. Or the other one is, we've got these group of people and they're just not optimal as a team. And how can we best kind of start to pull them together? And so I'll work in that situation. The executive coach, I'm often working with individual leaders, and they're often high potentials in the company, and the company wants to continue to reward them and get them even higher, move them up into the next level. And so I'm working with them to help them understand a little bit more how they lead, where they can be more effective, where they may have some derailers, things like that.
I got you. I got you. Okay. And so, once you help, what's the first barrier you run into? So, after the point of clarity with generating KPIs.
So what's the barrier after they do that?
So, like, you've gotten clarity on
Yeah.
where you want to go, but now you need to decide what you need to measure. What is one of the first barriers you run into when deciding KPIs?
I mean, I think the biggest barrier is figuring out what are the right KPIs.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole lot of barriers to get there. When you get there, then there's discussion around, okay, how do you measure it? And often people, when you ask, okay, so how are we going to measure our success in that? And people will often measure or kind of say, well, we can measure X. So that should be our measurement.
Mm,
And I say, well, let's back up. because just because can measure it, just because it's easy to measure, doesn't mean that's the right measurement. And so, what would success look like in the eyes of your customer? It's funny because I was teaching a leadership class yesterday, and somebody asked me a similar question, and they say, "Hey, how do we measure this?" And they were in a quality assurance function, and they were trying to figure out how do they measure it. And I said, "Well, how would your customer, whether that's an internal customer and an external customer, how would they define whether you're successful?" And so
Mm,
that's kind of one way you can start to look at it. But there's a whole bunch of challenges, to get to that KPI. I think once you get to the KPI, or those MBOs, whatever you call them, you've made some good headway.
yeah, yeah, no,
But
absolutely. I really like that idea of how would your customer measure success? Because ultimately that's what makes the company successful, right? It's like happy
right.
customers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be the end customer, the person who bought the product, because maybe you're an internal facing function, and maybe you're I spent most of my career in human resources, or maybe you're engineering. What would the marketing team define it as success? What would the end customer, how would they define it?
Yeah.
And then that's where you can start to figure out, okay, how do we measure that? But too often, teams or groups will start off with, well, we can measure X.
Yeah.
That's great, but will it tell you what you want?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's kind of reminds me of the difference between being effective and being like busy. Like
Right.
you're getting a lot done, but it's not effective stuff versus like measuring one thing that is effective.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to a woman who's doing some marketing for me, and she's doing a lot of stuff, but it hasn't resulted in some things that I want. And it's like, okay, there's action, and then there's results.
Yep.
And it's good to have actions, but if the action doesn't get to results, it doesn't matter. I mean, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. I've done a lot of ultra distance events, whether it's cycling or running, and I on my the watch I have can measure probably 100 different data points.
Mhm.
It's pace of your run, it's the pace of the last mile, it's your heart rate, it's the speed, it's your rotation. So it can measure all these things. So let's say there's 100 things, and when I'm getting ready to do an event, I look at what are the 3 things. I don't need to look at all 100 because that's just too much data. But what are those 3 points or 4 points that I really should be looking at? And that could change over time.
Yeah.
So what I measure this month, it's like, okay, I don't need to measure, I got that under control. Like I have a good sense of if when I'm cycling, how fast my legs are spinning or what my heart is beating at. So I'm not going to measure that because I know just intuitively, okay, it's probably 135 beats per minute.
Yeah.
But what is it that I really need to focus on? It's like get those measurements. So just because you can get the data, just because it can be easily and you can see 100 points on your watch, you know, look at the ones that matter most.
No, for sure. Absolutely. I love that. Well, tell us a bit more about your motivation. What really gets you up and keeps you going every day?
So, at my core, and we talked a little bit about this, I love adventures. And so how do I make sure that is a part of what I'm doing? I like to kind of try new things. And so my a couple of months ago, back in March and April, there was a lot going on in Ukraine, and we're and still is, and we're watching what's going on. And I looked at my wife because I'd seen another friend trying to help out, and I said, why don't we go over and try to raise some money, go to Poland and see what we can do there. And it was just this great big adventure. And it was also one of these things that, we have the means to do it. We can, it seems exciting. We can help out in a way. And so those types of things just draw to me. That's why I love to travel.
Yeah.
And so, going through the pandemic was a bit of a challenge, and I got to say this a little tongue in cheek because the challenges I was dealing with the pandemic were just pale in comparison with so many other people dealt with. But it's like, oh, I can't get out.
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out, all right, how can I still feed that part of who I am, in the house or around the house or with just the four of us, my two kids and my wife or my parents, and who live close by. And so that kind of drives me. And what also drives me is always kind of pushing to go a little bit further, to be a little bit better. And that's why I love the ultra events, because you can do one, and then, okay, next year you can kind of push it up a notch and do, you start off with a marathon, and then do 50 miles, and then you run 100 miles, and then it's like, okay, do 200 miles. And so there's always that, oh, how do you push yourself a little bit further? So that drives me, it excites me, and gets me up in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So you ran a 205-mile race. Is that correct?
Correct.
Tell me what's going through your mind when you're running for that long.
A lot of times it's just keep moving, look at the trail in front of you, because you're on an uneven trail. So this was around Lake Tahoe. So the elevation ranges from anywhere from about almost 6,000 feet to almost 10,000 feet. And you're running at times in the middle of the night, and you're running when you're sleep deprived. So for me, it was kind of 76 and a half hours. And, I really, for the first time, I really slept about 60 hours in, and I slept for 90 minutes.
Hmm.
And so when you get to that point, early on, you can be thinking of big, important things. But when you get later on in the race, it's like, okay, I just need to get to the next aid station. And you're looking at the trail in front of you. And I remember at night, I'd be running along and I would see these rocks, and we're out in bear country. And every time I'd see a rock, I would think it was a bear, and it kind of spooked me a little bit.
Yeah.
But then you got to play these games in your head to kind of get through the pain, get through the challenges you're faced with. And that's part of, people often say, oh, I could never physically do that. And it's like, physically is not the problem.
Yeah.
It's a mental game when you're doing something that long.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about that mental game, because right now I've been waking up at 5:30 with my fiance and going to the gym, and every day I wake up at 5:30 and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I continue to do this? And
Because
it's
it's your fiance and you want to make sure she's happy, Timmy. That's why you're doing it.
exactly. But it's so easy to get in your head, and I like wake up and I sit up in bed and I'm like, I could literally just lay back down right now and it would be the easiest thing ever. And I go back to sleep and that would be okay. Or the night before, it's like it's 9:30 and it's time to go to sleep. I'm like, I'm too bored to go to sleep. I don't want
Yeah,
to go to sleep right now.
but I gotta get up early.
Exactly, exactly. And so just tell me about some of those mental games you're playing. It's mile 188 and you're like, I've so much more to go, but I'm also so close to where I'm at. Like,
It's funny. Mile 188 is I only have half a marathon left, pretty much. This thing's almost done. I've got it, no problem. So mile 188 is easy.
okay.
Mile 125 is hard because, man, I'm just over halfway.
Yep.
Or mile 100 is like, okay, I'm tired now. I've only gone halfway, and
Yep.
I got another 36 hours to go before I finish this thing. So that's the hard one. Um, it's I don't like getting up and going to the gym, and so I don't, and I figure out what is it that will get me out, because I have to move. You got to exercise, you got to stay fit. And so I figure out what is it that I enjoy, and how can I balance out that joy and that need to exercise. And I enjoy going out for a bike ride. I enjoy going out for a run. And especially if there's a friend. And I think you hit on the one of the biggest things is, man, at 5:30 in the morning, I could just go back into bed.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
I often say the hardest part of exercise is getting out the door.
Absolutely.
When you get up and you get dressed, you're like 80% there. And when you walk out the door, it's like, I'm up. I'm dressed. I might
Yep.
as well go. So, because you're not going to go back to bed. Um, so, I mean, there's a couple of things to look at. It's like, why are you doing this? What is it? As for the book, Epic Performance, Lessons of 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. I interviewed obviously 100 people. Most were executives, and about 75% were executives, and 25% were ultra distance athletes. And what I heard over and over is you got to really understand where your passion is and why you're doing it. And to kind of share one of the stories, which is sports related, and I've got a number that are work related. But I was talking to one CEO. He was training for an Ironman, or when he had trained for an Ironman, I said, "What keeps you going?" I asked a similar question that you asked, and he said, my uncle died effectively because he was just too fat. He was overweight, and he hurt his back. He got stuck on the couch. He couldn't move. He kept gaining weight, made it harder to move, gained more weight, harder to move, gain, and effectively he just died on the couch. And this executive told me, he goes, I didn't want that to happen to me.
Mm.
So when I'm tired and I don't want to get up at 5:30 in the morning and exercise, I think of him. And I think I don't want that. So kind of goes back is why are we doing this? Why are you, what is it that, why is it you're going to the gym? And what's that bigger purpose? So it's really understanding that kind of that bigger purpose. And for me, getting up at, there were times I'd get up at 3 in the morning, run 30 miles, and knowing it was going to be either 80 or like 95 degrees out, or it was going to be raining sometimes. It's like I knew that I got to put the pain in. I got to deal with the pain now because it make me stronger when I get to the start line, and in order to get me to the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. Tapping into that why, tapping into the just the motivation behind stuff, and it makes it real, right? It makes it it brings the importance of it is maybe 20 years out, right? Like the effect of not dying on the couch is 20, 30 years out, but it brings it
Right.
now.
But I love what you're doing is you get up at 5:30 in the morning with your fiance, is you've got that accountability partner.
Hmm.
And I find that I'll go out and I'll ride with friends, and if one of the friends can't make it, or I just have to go by myself, it's harder because it's just me, but if I know that there's somebody else that's relying on me, then I don't want to let them down. And so that's why I think it is good to have an accountability partner. Have somebody that's going to meet you at the gym.
Yep.
And you don't want to call them at 5:30 and say, "Hey, I'm tired." It's like, "What are you wimping out, Timmy?"
Yep. Yep.
I think having an accountability partner is huge.
I
So
love that. Could you talk to us a little bit more? Were you about to say something? I feel like
no, no, that's good. Go ahead.
awesome. Could you talk to us a little bit more about accountability in the workplace, in teams? Because I noticed that so I'm 23 right now, and I've been really jumping into entrepreneurship heavily in the past year and a half because I want to generate enough revenue to replace my W-2. So I realized I couldn't be consistent with anything until this podcast. And the reason I was consistent with this podcast is because I had to interview guests. And
Hmm.
like they scheduled it and they were expecting me to be there at 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. Central Time every like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I showed up because of that. And now I have a daily podcast. And so
Yeah.
could you just tell us a little bit more about accountability, and specifically positive accountability, like not incorporating punishment, but more pulling people towards a goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on some of the key points, and is get other people involved. This is if you want to hold yourself accountable. Is that what you're looking? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the key thing is like tell somebody. And once you tell somebody, because when I have just an idea or something that I'm working on, and I just keep it in my head, if I don't do it, there's no ramifications. But when I tell somebody, then they're going to ask me about it. And I'll give you an example. Writing a book was no easy task. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and there was no deadline that it's like, oh, I have to have it by this time. I was purely kind of whenever I wanted to get it done. But I would tell people, and I was like, oh, hey, Timmy, I'm working on this book. And maybe I know I'm not going to see you for another 3 months or 4 months. When I do see you, there's a chance you're going to ask me about the book. And I don't want to, and let's say the last time I was 20% done and you ask me 3 months later, I don't want to tell you the same story. I'm 20% done.
Yeah.
Or, 3 months down the line, oh yeah, I'm working on it. Well, what percent done are you? I'm 20%. Well, that's what you were the last 2 times I asked you.
Yep.
So there is that you tell people what you're doing and when you expect it. And I found this with the book. It got to a point where it's like, I'm telling people and they're asking me and I'm asking me how it's going and I'm telling them the same answer. I need to change that.
Yeah.
And so I'm holding myself accountable. The other thing is find somebody that you can trust that will hold you accountable. And it may just be, you go, and I wouldn't do it on a spouse or I'd ask somebody else. You can do it on the spouse, but try to get somebody else that will just ask you like, hey, I want you to ask me every month where I am on this fill in the blank. And if I give you the same answer that I gave you last time, I give you permission to say, what? You're not doing anything? Whatever it is.
Yep.
So give that person the permission to hold you accountable. And then oh yeah, I'm going to be seeing Bryan in a couple of weeks. I better get my butt moving and get something done.
Yeah.
But I think accountability is a big issue. And how do you hold yourself accountable? The other thing you can do is, are there certain rewards that you can give yourself when you reach a certain goal? So if hey, I want to do 200 podcasts, and that's a big, that's a lot, as you know,
Yep.
is all right. I got to get 25 done. So when I get 25, I'm going to reward myself with fill in the blank. If you like, want to go to a nice restaurant, I'm gonna go out to this nice restaurant, or I'm gonna go get an ice cream, or whatever it is. But think what motivates you, and it doesn't have to be big, but it's like, okay, yeah, or I'm gonna take a day off.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, but have some sort of what's that reward you get when you reach that goal.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I love it. I think rewarding yourself is key. I've noticed that I have been quick to, a lot of us can be, especially entrepreneurs, can be our own toughest critic, which is good for extreme ownership, but it also has a con when you get a win and you just focus on the loss of like,
Yeah.
okay, so I got my first sales call, but I didn't close it. Or
Yeah.
now I'm getting 6 sales calls a week, but I'm not hitting my close rate. And there's so many things that you can, there's always amazing things happening and there are always horrible things happening. And I like that idea of rewarding yourself because it puts emphasis and focus on the wins, and where your attention goes, it'll like grow whatever you focus on. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on, Timmy. And another thing that to kind of think about is, how do you build in an acceptable level of failure?
Mm.
So, one of the guys I spoke to, a phenomenal CEO. He now coaches a lot of exec CEOs, and he's a really good golfer. And he plays on the pro-am. He's the am part of the pro, so he's the amateur, but he's a very competitive golfer. And he says, when I go out to golf, I know every hole is not going to be perfect. So I give myself permission to have 2 bogeys. And now, if those 2 bogeys happen on the first 2 holes, I tell myself, I said, well, I gave myself 2 bogeys. I got them. I don't have any more left.
Mm.
And so it's that mindset. And I remember when I was training, I was running or biking 6 days a week for, almost a year. Actually, it was over that because I had completed a 100-miler before. And I told myself, I will give myself 3 days where if I don't want to exercise, I don't want to go out and run, I don't want to go out and ride, I get this get out of jail card in essence.
Yeah.
Now, it was, if there was an injury, that was different because you got to protect yourself. But it was just like, I just don't want to. I want to stay in bed.
Yeah.
And so I gave myself that permission that over the course of the next year, I've got these 3 days that I can use them, no questions asked. And so it's freeing. And coincidentally, surprisingly, I didn't use any of them.
Yeah.
Because I would get up and it was like it was raining and it was 4 in the morning, and I thought, oh man, this would be a good day to stay in bed. But then I thought, you know, if it's raining on race day or race weekend, I should say, I'm going to be stronger if I go out and train today.
Hmm.
So, what are those things you can give yourself? So, if you make 10 sales calls, not all 10 are going to be successful.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, of the 10, 9 of them can be failures and one can be a success. So on your ninth fail, it's like, okay, the next one's got to be a success.
Yeah.
So, give yourself permission to fail.
I love it. There we go. Well, now we're going to jump into your dreams and goals. So tell us about your vision for your company and your life.
Yeah. Um, from the company perspective, I, I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do. I get to choose. I get to kind of choose the clients I want to work with. And when there's a client that comes along, it's like, that's not my for what I enjoy doing. I can say no to it. So I've got that business that's coming in, and so it allows me to work with some really smart people and some really really good people. Now my focus is on how do I build the book bigger into the brand, and so how do you get more speaking engagement, more keynotes is one of the things that I'm focusing on, because it's all about how, fundamentally the book is how do you get people to think a little bit bigger than they did yesterday.
Yeah.
And I mean, when we look back over these last 3 years, there's things that, 3 years ago we would have said were impossible. And we did a lot of things in the last 3 years, like sending everybody and working from home. you know,
Yeah.
a lot of things we did were impossible, and so that's it. So I think you said, dreams in the personal life as well, kind of career and personal life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so travel's important. Kind of the bigger dreams, all 7 continents, all 50 states, is where I wanna go to. I also want to drive across the United States with my wife. I have two boys, and so one will be going into college in a couple of years, so he's middle of high school, and then the other one will be in high school next year, and so they will eventually go off to college, and we'll go travel more. Is what we do. So and then figuring out, and this is where my wife and I are really looking at, is what is that legacy that we want to live when we're gone? How do we set up some sort of endowment that can support the things that are important to us and continue to make a difference, long after we're gone.
Yeah, for sure. Where are you guys leaning on the legacy piece right now, if you don't mind me asking?
In terms of,
Like where the endowment would be focused or
yeah, no, I mean, there's a couple things that I've always been interested in. Education is one area, and it's just, if kids can get a strong education, they can do anything.
yeah.
And then, my dad was a foster kid, and all you look at any statistics, he should be either dead or in jail. So, and he didn't.
Yeah.
He's, next year he and my mom will be married for 60 years. Just a phenomenal father, great businessman, and so he defied all odds and did what unfortunately not a lot do.
Yeah.
And so how do I help folks that are in a tough situation like that, to give them that chance to be successful? One of the things I haven't tapped into that I'm starting, I'll probably start to explore in the next couple of years, is working with the prison system. Um, you know, there's intellectual capital there that is just sitting in a box.
Yeah.
Now, there's probably a good reason they're sitting there, but when they come out, there's just, the numbers just indicate that they're going to go back in.
Yeah.
And so is there something I can do to decrease their chances of going back in there? And it's there's some selfish reasons because as a taxpayer, I don't want to pay it. But there's also that non-selfish reason is like they don't want to be there. They probably want to be, in most cases, and they want to probably be doing something more productive with their life and in society.
Hmm.
And so, is there a way that I can help in that? And I haven't answered that question yet, but it is something that has been on my mind for many years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. Do you think it's from the prison perspective, do you think it's a matter of stability when they come out, a matter of education while they're in, so that they come out with the right education, a matter of community, um,
You're
all
probably
encompassing?
yeah, you're probably right on all those, Timmy. And I don't have enough knowledge to know at this point.
Hmm.
But I gotta think just intellectually and kind of my gut that you're probably right on those things. They come out and as somebody who spent entire career in human resources, if I looked at a resume and I saw somebody was a felon or spent time in prison, that resume is not going to get further or going to
Yeah,
get much further. And was that right of me? Probably not. But as when you hire people, it's this risk reward, and it's like, all right, maybe I need to go to the next person. And so, how do you try to get them into a stable environment? If they come out and can't get a job, you know,
yeah,
then they can't get money,
yeah,
and they're gonna need money, so they're gonna go get money, and they may not get it in a legal manner. And it's going to shoot them back in. So I'm not an expert in this area. I just don't have enough knowledge, but I think you probably hit on the big ones of why it happens.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it drives me crazy. So it's like, all right, is there something I can do to help, even if it's a little bit?
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, awesome. If there were one or two people that you could meet right now, and this could be a specific person or a type of person, and they'd really help you take the next step towards these dreams and goals, who would they be and how would they
Oh,
help?
oh, I love that question. I I think you're talking to almost any president
Yep.
would be pretty cool. Just to understand kind of how the heck did they get there?
Yeah. Trying to
And
be president?
no, I'm not trying to be president. Just I'm interested in kind of how people get to that point. How do you get there? And so it's just fascinating. I think one of the things that I most enjoyed about the writing this book is being able to interview the 100 people. I would love to keep interviewing people and you get to do it all the time. So I think it's fun to talk to people that are way smarter than I am and just have some interesting stories. And I get it. It's like, it's cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sounds like you got a podcast in there. Do you have a podcast?
I don't. No, I'm gonna leave it to the experts. You're the expert in that, Timmy. I'm gonna let you do that. I'll come on and life is all about kind of figuring out what is it you're good at, what is it you want to do,
Hmm.
and so if I were to go down the podcast route, I could do it, but it would take time away from other things that I would enjoy. I'm getting ready to teach a graduate course up at the university not far from my house where I got my master's, and it's like, okay, I want to spend time doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's going to be fun. I'm going to enjoy it, I hope. And so it's really, if you're going to do one thing, you got to take something else off the plate. And right now, I've got enough on the plate that I don't want to add other too many other things on there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, how about you name the most important one or two things that everyday people can do to help you accomplish your goals? So you run into Sally at the grocery store, and Sally's sitting there and she's like, Brian, how can I help you do what you want to do? What would you
Uh,
tell her?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing right now, I'm really focusing on getting more word out about the book,
Hmm.
and kind of raising the visibility there. And so I think what I would look at her is, all right, does your company want to bring me on in order to kind of talk to your folks about how they can be more successful kind of longer term, how they can strive, to bigger goals, either personally or professionally. How they can persevere through difficult situations, because that's when you're running 200 miles, that's what you have to learn to do.
Yeah.
And talking to all these people, I learned it from them. So that would be the biggest thing that I would be looking for at this point. It's like, all right, how do you get me into your company or get me in front of different groups?
Yeah. There we go. And now we're going to jump into our thriving three. First question is, what is your favorite book, movie, or podcast? Pick one.
Favorite book, movie, or podcast? I will go with movie, and I will have to say The Great Escape. It's
Mhm.
it's it's a World War II movie. I'm not a huge World War II buff, but every time this movie comes around, if I'm flipping through the TV and I see him partway through, there's a good chance I'm going to stay.
Love it. Love it. There we go. And what is one way you like to take care of yourself?
Get out for a bike ride. Yeah, that's quick. If I tend to be a little tense and my wife notices that I'm a little short with the kids or a little short with her, she'll say, "Hey, hon, have you thought about going for a bike ride?" And that's her euphemism for saying, "You're annoying me. Get out of here and go for a bike ride. You'll be a much nicer person when you return."
I gotcha. I gotcha. And what is one action step you can take right now or continue to take if you're already doing it to meet and talk to a president?
Oh, I love that question. Um, what I could probably do is talk to my one of my congressmen, and then that would make a connection to a connection that could potentially get me there.
I feel that. I feel that. I think you could. Wow, that's crazy. We really can all just go talk to a congressman, and they're probably like two or three away, you know?
And it's funny because for me, I ran a couple political campaigns in the area, and so I was able to connect up with our local congressman for an endorsement on these two campaigns. So it wouldn't be that difficult to make that connection, and I know his chief of staff. So there's a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I could never do it." It's like, "Oh, I love," and I talk about it in the book. It's like, okay, what's one small thing you can do in the next 72 hours,
Yeah,
and how do you move forward? It's just, you don't start a marathon by running a marathon. You start it by running 1 mile,
there we
and
go.
then 2 miles. I love these questions, Jimmy.
I'm glad I could ask him. Glad I could ask him. So, does that mean you're going to reach out to your local congressman?
I think I have to think about that one.
There we go. There we go. And now we're going to jump into our final series of questions. So, these are questions that I did not send beforehand. So, if you don't know the answer, feel free to say I don't know. They also require a bit of pretext, so stick with me as I read them, okay?
All right.
So, a lot of people have come on the podcast and they've said that the catalyst that helps people change from having a fixed mindset, not willing to accept help and not willing to accept change, to having a growth mindset, being willing to accept help and being willing to accept change, the catalyst that helps people make that switch is a personal choice that happens after either extreme inspiration or extreme desperation. Do you agree, disagree, have anything to add or subtract?
I think it could probably apply to both of them. In some people, it could be inspiration that they see somebody has done something cool, and it's like, oh, maybe I could do it.
Yeah,
Or in some cases, they see it's like, they went through a terrible situation, and it's like, I got to get out of this hole, and I've got to change. So I think it could be both.
there we go. Yeah, I love it. And given the same amount of inspiration or desperation, why do you think that some people make the choice to change and others don't?
I would guess it would depend on what their motivation is. What is that? It goes back to that why. The guy I was talking about, who he saw his uncle, just eventually die on the couch. He had a very strong why. And so it goes back to, it's like, why am I doing this? What is that reason that is so powerful that it's going to get me to make this change?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so for those out there, so the people who experience inspiration or desperation and they change would seemingly have a strong why. But for those out there who may feel stuck right now, or they're experiencing inspiration or desperation and they cannot change, what would you say to them about getting in touch with their why?
So if they want to make a change, so are we assuming they want to make a change?
Yes.
Yeah. So often, what I would say is think of something really small that will move them in that right direction. And you asked the question about, okay, if you want to meet the president, what do you do? There's often think about two ways when you're trying to get to something big. Is one is think of the really big, the why. But then the other one is think of the really little. It's
Yep.
like, what? Because sometimes that why is so big that it's like, oh, it's too much for me to get there. It's like, I want to meet the president. Oh, that's too big.
Yeah.
But it's very easy for me to do something today that moves me in that direction. So, what I would probably in that situation say, okay, what is it that you can do in the next 72 hours, similar how you asked me, next 72 hours that will move you one step closer? What is that one thing, and get them to look at it. And then when that's done, what's another one? So it starts to build some confidence.
Yep.
And, confidence comes from small wins. So it builds that confidence and it gets the ball rolling. You don't start a train at a fast pace. You start it really slow, and then it gets up to speed. So how do you get the wheels just slowly going?
Yeah.
And then it starts to build some momentum. So what's that one thing? And then what? Repeat and repeat and repeat.
There we go. I love it. And so some people need a small amount of desperation or inspiration to change, and others need a larger, more consistent amount. You might be echoing yourself a little bit here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you think establishes that threshold, and can it be influenced?
What establishes that threat? I don't know what establishes that threshold. Can it be influenced? I've got to think. Yeah, it can be influenced. There's people that you have that accountability partner. You have, depending on how desperate you are, would could influence. Depending on how strong that why is, could influence. Depending on how much pain. And so if you can, there's going to be pain, there's going to be risk. Can you break that pain into smaller chunks? Can you break that risk into smaller chunks? So that's a good question. I'm not sure I know the full answer, but
I,
then I wonder, does any of us know that?
yeah, no, that's why I'm asking the questions. If it was out
Yeah.
there, I would have I would have just read a book. But I really love that you said break the risk down into smaller chunks. It's kind of tangential here, but with real estate, I love real estate. I love real estate
Yeah.
investing. And I've just really been trying to pick up that first property because I'm 23. And I know if I start picking up properties now, by the time I'm 43, 53, those properties are going to be paid off and cash flowing me every month, right?
Right.
And so I've been having trouble picking up this first property. And I was like, um, I've read the book Who Not How recently, and Who Not How talks a lot about um, just when you find yourself procrastinating, there's probably somebody else you need to plug into the spot, or instead of asking how you can do something, ask who do I need to like come help me do this thing. And so I was like, really, I need the capital right now. I have the skills. I know how to underwrite. I know how to find them. I know how to go through the whole process. I just need the capital and the risk. I didn't know any private investors that were willing to take on that risk with somebody so new. So instead, I was like, I'm gonna get a group of 10 to 20 people who are just like me, also wanting to invest in real estate. I'll bring the skills. They bring their 500 to 1,000 a month. We start scaling our portfolio. In 30 years, it's going to be a lot bigger, but we'll each have 5% of it. So it'll kind of be the same, but we will all be at our wealth number that we want to hit. And so that was really a way to manage that risk, also hit my goal. I just thought that was a cool
I,
example.
you know, I love it, and it's funny that you use the real estate, because one of the guys I spoke to, he's a real estate, he's a vice president in technology, but on the side he invests in real estate in the San Francisco market, and and houses aren't cheap in the San Francisco market.
Facts.
And at one point, he was 90% leveraged. And yeah, so you know what that means. It's like
Yeah.
you have a lot of debt,
Yep.
and for if you don't know what it means. And he had borrowed money from his parents who were retired. And so he was having a it was hard to sleep at night,
Yeah.
when the market goes up or down. And he said, what I had to do is I had to break my risk and look at what are the most likely or what are the things that could happen. I could lose my job, I could lose a tenant, or I would have to do a major like remodel or a major capital expenditure. Those were the three big risks that could happen. He goes, so I looked at those three and then I assessed each one of those. So I broke it down. And it's like, okay, if I lose my job, I can get a job probably fairly easy, or, I can put some money aside. So he would break each one down. And that's a big component of how you manage risk is we often think of the, complete annihilation. Well, that's the worst case scenario. What's a realistic worst case scenario, and take a smaller version of it and then try to break it down further. And how do you tackle those small versions? And that's what you're doing to manage your risk. Is you're diversifying.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely. There we go.
love
I
it.
love it. There we go. Well, we got one last question for you.
All right.
So, in Atomic Habits, for this question, keep in mind a person who has a fixed mindset, they're not willing to accept help, and they're not willing to accept change.
Okay.
So, in Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about the 4 laws of changing your behavior. And the laws are to make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. With that context in mind, and the avatar we just talked about, how can we, you and I, create an environment that makes it more obvious, more attractive, more easy, and more satisfying for people for that avatar to make the choice that will change their life?
I think we have to ask the questions about what would motivate them. Where are their desires? Where are their interests?
Mm,
We can't change them, but maybe we can open up some things that they may not have thought about, and or maybe they're afraid to move forward with something. And so, how do we ask those questions and kind of help point them in a direction that makes that fear look a little bit smaller, that risk look a little bit smaller, or ask the questions about, when you succeed, how are you going to feel about this?
mm.
And is that feeling greater than the pain you're going to experience in order to get there? So I think we can ask questions and kind of help open up some of the doors for folks.
There we go. I love it. Well, Bryan, is there anything else you want to chat about before we sign off?
These were good questions, Timmy. I love these questions. So, if people want to get my book, it's on Amazon. It's called Epic Performance: Lessons of 100 Executives and Ultra Distance Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak.
There we go. And yeah, Bryan, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Timmy. Good to see you and good to talk to you.
Of course, if you guys are listening to this, you heard Bryan, go ahead and go get his book. All the link to do that will be down in the show notes, and all the links to contact him and follow him will be down in the show notes as well. As we always ask, shoot this podcast over to 1 to 3 people need to hear this message. Go ahead and give us a 5-star review on iTunes if you liked the show. And on that note, we're out.